Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we're with the San Antonio Storytellers Association, and I want to welcome everyone because this is the first Wednesday of the month. And the first Wednesday of every month, we have storytelling, reaching across to tell our stories, connecting us always during this time. We have some great tellers for us tonight, and this is the month of October. And if we're lucky and keep our fingers crossed and throw a little salt over our shoulder, we may have some spooky tales. So let's get ready, and we'll start with Double, Double, Tall in Trouble, Fire, Burn, and Cauldron Bubble. Fillet of the finny snake in the cauldron boil and bake. And speaking of bakers and baking, our first teller up is a wonderful baker, and I wonder what she has cooked for us tonight. So let's welcome Susan Whipple. Happy hands. Susan, you're up.
Thank you. My tale is more eerie than spooky. It was New Year's Eve a long time ago, and I was living in Montana. I was an EMT, an emergency medical technician, on call. And I was at my boyfriend's house. His name was Hank. We were having a late dinner. About 10 o'clock, I was paged and I had to leave. When I got to the scene, the patient was a young boy, about 16, I would think, very big for his age, very good looking. He had blonde hair down to his shoulders, and his green eyes were bloodshot. He was also having grand mal seizures. Well, I took his vitals and his heart rate was rapid. His blood pressure was through the roof. And as he looked at me, I knew that he was in trouble, but that I was there to help him. The crew tried to load him in the ambulance, but because he was such a big fellow and because of the seizures, they were having a difficult time. And so somebody got a big blanket out of the ambulance and they wrapped him tightly in it. And then they could manage to get him on the gurney and into the ambulance. And the ambulance took off for the nearest hospital. I got into my car and I followed behind. By the time I got there and parked and walked inside, the emergency room people had gotten him in a cubicle, and I was watching from the glass outside. They had hooked him up to an IV, they had given him oxygen, and they had sent off some blood to the lab to be tested. It didn't take long for the blood test to get back, and what it showed that this young fellow had a lot of cocaine in his bloodstream. But aside from that, there was another substance that they couldn't even identify, a foreign substance, and that was what was giving him trouble. Well, the ER personnel worked on him for a long time, and even staff came from other parts of the hospital, and they did what they could. But as I watched this boy, I could see that even though his body was alive, it seemed that his soul had left. And so I left too. I went back to Hank's, and of course it was very late and he was asleep, but there was no sleep for me that night. All I could think of was this boy was having the trouble and not doing well at all. And so after a while, I just got up and I dressed warmly because it had gotten really cold, and I decided to go for a drive. Going for a drive always relaxed me, and I thought that would help. So I got downstairs, I got in the car and I started off. And not long after I started, I decided I would head for Yellowstone Park. That would make it about a 3-hour drive. Well, as I started off, it also began to snow, very lightly at first, but then the snow got really, really heavy and it was coming down full force, and there were snow drifts all over and the wind was blowing them into high drifts, and even the trees were bending down their branches with the weight of this new snow. And I drove and my mind was wandering. And after a while, I realized that I was on a road that I didn't recognize. It was a narrow country road, no houses, no other cars. I was all by myself in this terrible snowstorm, and I didn't know where I was. Well, I thought that perhaps I should just turn around and try to find my way back. But with all the snowdrifts on the road and on the side of the road, I thought that wouldn't do me any good. I would probably get stuck, and there was nobody there to help me. So I thought about my predicament for a while, and I looked down at the gas gauge, and I was all right. I still had about half a tank of gas. And as I looked up, I could see a little glimmer of light in my rearview mirror. And the glimmer got brighter, and it was headlights, and it was a great big pickup truck, one of those crew cab deals. And it was coming behind me, and I got out of my car and I jumped up and down and I waved my hands, and the driver stopped a few yards in front of me, actually. He stopped the truck, he got out, and I was going to tell him what the problem was when he started yelling at me. This man was a huge man. He was tall and good looking. He was wearing Western clothes and hat, but I could tell he had blonde hair down to his shoulders, and he looked at me with piercing green eyes, and then he shouted and yelled. He said, "What in the world are you doing out here in the middle of nowhere during this storm? You probably don't even know where you are anymore. What kind of idiot are you?" Well, I tried to explain that I was having a problem, and he didn't let me talk. He said, "You are totally out of your mind. And besides which, you probably don't know even that you are not in Montana anymore. You're in Idaho." And then he stopped finally. And I was able to tell him that I was lost and I was in trouble and I probably could use some gas as well. So he said he would help me. And he said he knew where there was a service station, but it would be closed. And he would direct me following behind me. And when I got there, I was to go behind the station and look for the man's house and knock on the door, and he would come out and fill up the tank and give me directions. Well, that was fine. And I got back in the car, he got back in the truck, and he followed along where his headlights were just blinding me in my mirror. And every time we had to make a turn, he would pound on the horn and he would point his finger one way or the other way, whichever way he wanted me to turn. And I did, and it was fine. And after a while, I saw down the slope on the side of the road, there was an entrance to the gas station. And I slowly drove down there and I parked near the gas pumps and I opened the gas tank. And then I walked around to the bank and I found the house and I knocked on the door and I knocked, and finally the man came out and I told him that I was lost and I needed gas and I needed directions, and he said he would help. So I walked up front again, thinking that while I was waiting, I would go up to the road up that little incline, and I thanked the man who helped me find the gas station and help. But when I got up there, he wasn't there. And his truck wasn't there either. That was kind of odd. Well, I looked around for his tire tracks. I looked and I saw my own car's tire tracks, but I didn't see his. Now, I would see his tracks. His truck was bigger than mine. It was wider than mine. The tires were bigger. The tread was heavier, but it was only my tire tracks that I saw. It was pretty peculiar. Well, I still wasn't satisfied, and I walked up the road a little bit, maybe quarter of a mile, and I crossed over and came back the quarter of a mile to the gas station, and I could not see his tire tracks. There was nothing, just mine. By the time I got back, the man had finished filling the tank, and I paid him, and he gave me directions to get back to where I was familiar with the roads. And I thanked him and I left. And this time I really didn't daydream or think about anything except getting back to where I was familiar. And by that time, the snow had abated a little bit and it was a little more comfortable driving. And then I realized I was back where I knew the landmarks. I was familiar with the road and it was okay. So I relaxed, I sat back a little bit, and I thought about all the incidents of that night. Getting paged, finding the young man, having him have all that terrible stuff in his bloodstream, not looking good for him at all. And then I thought about his piercing green eyes and the green eyes on the man who directed me to find help. And you know, green eyes aren't all that common in people. So it got me to thinking, and I was wondering whether there was someone or something who somehow was watching over me that night. Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, Mark, I think you forgot to unmute yourself. Mark, you still did not unmute everyone.
Unmute. Are you
Yeah.
guys there now?
Yes, we can hear you again.
Okay. Can everyone hear me besides the show? Yes. All right. Thank you. I'm going to repeat this again because I don't know if I was heard or not. I want to thank you, Susan, for that wonderful story. There's always souls out there that are guiding us, that's leading us. And so now we will go to our next story, but I want to thank everybody for being here again. This is the San Antonio Storytellers reaching out to you for our stories once a month. Our next teller is Nathan Holiner. He is a wonderful teller, and he's been telling with us for over a year, and we're happy to have him here. And let's see what he's going to tell us tonight. Nathan?
Thank you, Mark. Now, for the month of October, I've got the perfect Halloween story for you. Why is it that Halloween is the scariest night of the year? Is it because of the dark night? Or is it because of the scary shapes that we see? Or is it because of the strange noises we hear? I don't know. But if you want to find out, come with me. It is a dark, dark night. The moon is out and the wind is blowing loudly. And we are walking down a dark, dark road in a dark, dark forest. The trees are dark, dark. The branches are stretching out over the road and casting long shadows. And we are now hearing some animal sounds. At least, I think they're animal sounds. What's that sound? Is someone moving over there? I don't know. But let's keep walking. We are now walking over a dark, dark river on a dark, dark bridge. The planks are creaking with every step we take. Is something down in the water? I don't know. But let's keep on walking. And now we have come to a dark, dark house. All the windows are dark. All the lights are turned off. And I don't think there's anyone home. But let's go in anyway, because we really want to find out why the dark night is so scary. We're walking right up to the dark, dark door. And now I am knocking on the dark, dark door. No one's answering, but we're going to go inside anyway. I am now opening the dark, dark door, and we are now inside the dark, dark house. Hello? Is anyone home? No answer. The halls are dark, dark. The furniture and the statues are making strange shapes. And now we are walking up some dark, dark stairs. The steps are squeaking with every step that we take. The stairs lead us to a dark, dark attic. The attic is very, very dark, dark. The objects inside the attic seem even stranger than downstairs or out in the forest. And there in a dark, dark corner is a dark, dark trunk. And when I open it, out jumps a dark, dark, boo! Ghost. And that's my story for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nathan, for that dark, dark tale. You took us step by step, inch by inch. We got closer and closer and closer into your story. We are the San Antonio Storytellers Association, and this is Story Night. I want to thank everyone for being here, and particularly our people behind the scenes, John Hill and Karen Archer. Thank you. Our next teller tonight is Jamie Blount, and let's see what he has in store for us tonight. Jamie? Hello. I don't know.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, now we can.
Thank you. If you don't hear me later, please let me know and I'll do everything I can to get it fixed. Anyway, I'm 73 years old, and about 30 years ago, I went through what's called midlife. I wouldn't call it midlife crisis, but it was midlife, in that what worked for me when I was 21 didn't necessarily work for me when I was 41. It was a lot like adolescence. What worked for me when I was 10 didn't necessarily work for me when I was 13. And I had to rearrange my life accordingly. The two have a lot in common, amazingly enough. I had some struggles during adolescence, and I had some struggles during midlife. So I'm going to share with you some of my midlife struggles. I wouldn't call it midlife crisis, but they were struggles. I worked as a salesman for many years, and long about the age of 40, 41, everything just kind of came unglued. My job became totally meaningless. My marriage fell apart. Friends that I had for years were no longer in touch with me because we had changed so much. We didn't have much in common. So I had to reorder, rearrange, reconstruct my life. So I went away to a retreat, a spiritual retreat up in Pennsylvania in the Pocono Mountains, and learned something I'll never forget. Live your dream. Live your dream. What was my dream? Well, my dream was to go away, far, far, far away from home and live. And I thought, well, what are you going to do to support yourself? Why don't you teach school? So I networked with lots of embassies down in Washington, D.C., and with friends and relatives and anybody I could think of that could help me find a job overseas. And then one morning, as I was getting ready to go to work, I was pulling on my trousers and the phone rang. And a guy from Hungary, a little country next to Austria in Central Europe, called me and said, we have a job for you at a gymnasium where you'll teach English as a second language. So I said, well, can you tell me a little bit more about it? He did. I said, put that on the contract in writing. I'd like to see it, and I'll be in touch. So about 10 days later, I got the contract, and I signed it, and I mailed it back to him. And then about 90 days later, I was in Hungary teaching English in a gymnasium. For those of you who maybe aren't familiar with what gymnasium is a high school for young people who want to go on to college or university. Maybe they want to study chemistry, biology, maybe they want to study law or medicine, or maybe they want to be a teacher, but it's very much for students who are interested in going to college and university. So I taught there for 2 years, actually. And in my contract, there was a clause that said I had to have a cultural experience for the school's students. I didn't quite know what to do. So I thought, well, I think what I'll do is have a Halloween party for the students. They don't have Halloween over here. And as we all know, kids love Halloween. So I thought, I think I'm going to organize, if I can, a Halloween party for the school's students. So I spoke to the director of the school and he said it was okay. And then I had to think, okay, now what am I going to do to make this thing come off? So I thought, well, in America, a lot of kids like to drink Cokes. I bet the kids over here like Cokes too, at least they seem to. I want to have a Halloween disco. So I arranged to get a hold of a DJ. The DJ was nothing more than a boy who was one of my students who was obstreperous, as you can imagine. The poor fellow was from a broken home. I think his home was a war zone between his mother and his father, and he was just off the wall half of the time. So he was an excellent DJ for the disco. Somehow he knew how to get a hold of some records or CDs or whatever to play. And he was one hell of a good DJ, let me tell you. He won the hearts and minds of everybody in that auditorium or in that gymnasium, including me. I had to get something for those kids to eat. So I went out to the supermarket and I bought a whole load of apples. And I bought some brown sugar and some honey and some cinnamon and made baked apples. But I couldn't make them all by myself. So I said to my classes, I've got some cooking I've got to do for our Halloween party. And I'd like to invite anybody who'd like to come and help me cook to come over, please. So about a half a dozen girls came over who were in my classes. They came over and together we baked apples. My apartment was just ridden with that smell of baking apples, you know, the honey, the cinnamon. It was just a wonderful experience. Then we had to transport the apples from my apartment over to the school. And we had to get the Cokes are already there. So I had a Halloween disco for the students. It was part of my contract and it was fun. I had a good time. The students had a good time. Word got out about this Halloween party and there were people in the town who wanted to come to it who weren't students in the school. We had to shoo them away. They wanted to see what a Halloween disco was. They were very, very curious. I didn't like doing that, but we couldn't include everybody. So anyway, the director of the school, very, very nice man, I think was the most scared person in that entire party. You know, Halloween's a scary time for people. Well, he was the one who was scared. He came dressed in his gray flannel suit, conservative necktie, black shoes, and white shirt, because I think he was afraid that we were going to have some kind of a catastrophe there. Well, that didn't happen. There was no alcohol there. It was a Halloween party for teenagers with music and dancing and Coca-Colas and baked apples. And fortunately, we had a very, very nice time together. But I could tell by the look on the principal's face, he was very worried. And when it was over, I could tell he looked very relieved that it was over with. But I had to fulfill the terms of my contract. And so I had a Halloween party for the students. It was a fun evening. The students had a good time, like I said. Some of them wore costumes, some of them didn't, but it gave them an opportunity to see what Halloween is like in America. You see, in Hungary, it's a whole lot different. I don't know if you've lived any place else around Halloween, but in many places, it's a very somber occasion. You remember the dead, and you go to the graveyard, and you might put a little candle next to the grave of a loved one in his or her honor. And something I used to love to do on Halloween was to go out and walk the town at night and walk by the cemetery and see that whole hill just aglow with little candles next to the graves. It was beautiful. It really was. It really was. I got some flack from some fellow teachers. What are you going to do? Make fun of dead people? Is that what you do in America on Halloween? Make fun of dead people? I said, no, it's not that at all. We don't take it quite the way that you do here. It's a time for revelry and fun and costumes, kind of like carnival that you have here, you know. And here in Europe, you have Carnival, you know, when you celebrate like Mardi Gras and then getting ready for Easter and everything. Well, we don't quite do that in America, but we have Halloween, which is time to get dressed up in a costume. And anyway, well, that all kind of died out. But that night, I remember going out with a colleague of mine to have a little drink, a little libation, a little nightcap. And I remember I was in blackface, as were some other people there as well. And I remember going into a bar with my colleague, and I got a few funny looks when I walked in there with blackface. But I just said, "Happy Halloween." They left me alone. So anyway, that was my Halloween event, midlife, if you will. I went through midlife. I had to rearrange my life. I came home after 2 years, went back to school, worked, went to school at night, worked in the daytime, lived on a tight budget, borrowed money, and I got a master's degree in teaching English as a second language at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And then with that degree, I was able to get a full-time job, which I got in Texas at the Defense Language Institute, where I taught for almost 20 years. Anyway, it was a good career. I did it for like 27 years. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad it's behind me. Will I go through midlife again? I don't think so. I'm too old for that right now. But I've learned that sometimes that journey, that bumper sticker, all who wander aren't lost. Well, I did a lot of wandering during that time. And at times I felt very lost. But I'm glad I did it. And I think I'd do it again if I had to. So the moral of the story, if I may say so, is live your dream. Live your dream. That's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Happy hands for Jamie. I really did like that story because I'm a disco guy, and disco and Halloween, you just can't go wrong.
Got a point there.
Yeah. Our next teller up tonight. So we've gone from souls guiding us. We went down a dark path. We had a little disco and Halloween, and we'll see what Jane is cooking up for us tonight. Jane McDaniel. Let's welcome her, and happy hands. And Jane, we're ready.
I was going to say that's Jamie. That's a hard act to follow. Thank you. Yeah.
You're too kind. You're too kind.
Well, I've got a story from the west of Ireland, and where fairies still live and leprechauns, and we live a little bit in the past. In between, there is a place between now and then, which is where the good stories happen. And there was a man lived up on the hill. His name was Mad Mike Murphy. At least that's what everybody called him. He really wasn't mad. But what he did was live alone, and it was an old house that had belonged to his family for a long time. Now, a man living on his own is not unusual in Ireland, except this man was a little off. The Irish are very garrulous people. They like to hang together, talk, and this man did not. He would stay in his house. He was extremely, extremely good looking, never married. The women around at first were very interested in him, but he didn't seem interested in any of them. So they left him alone. And he lived up there. Sometimes he came down, and rumors started to circulate, as they do on islands, about him. He was seen often in the cemetery. We have 5 cemeteries there on that island. And he would go and walk in them. And there were stories there told that he was some kind of doctor. He had been a doctor at one time because he had been off the island, and that he could bring dead people to life. Now, that was a story we wouldn't believe. And there were other stories that he was some kind of a magician, that he could call up souls if they were in trouble. Of course, that's a story we didn't want to believe. He lived on his own. There were people who moved to that island. They were what we call blow-ins. There are people who come and they don't stay for long, or maybe they stay, they never become islanders. So they're called blow-ins because we have a lot of wind over there. And these people were quite rich. They rented a big house. Looked like they weren't staying if they were renting. They had a beautiful daughter. Her name was Rachel. Oh, she was gorgeous. She was beginning 20s. She was long and lithe, blonde hair, most unusual on an island which was populated with dark-haired, sallow-skinned women, some red-haired. But this woman, with her blonde hair and her green eyes, she was something special. And it seemed that Mad Mike Murphy came alive because he visited her. He visited the parents, first of all, as a courtesy call, what we call a courtesy call. It was usually a curiosity call. People would come to the house and bring something, or just come, welcome people to the house, to the island. They wanted to see what the house looked like inside, how many people lived there, their stories. Mad Mike came a few times. He always brought presents for her. He brought her bunches of red roses. Oh boy, did he know what they meant? Surely he did. He brought her a golden bracelet once, her name engraved on it, and more flowers. She wasn't interested. She wasn't, although he was good looking and he wasn't very old. She had her eyes on somebody else, somebody she had met before. His name was Aidan. He was at university studying computer science over in Castlebar. When he came to the island, she and Aidan got together. They were inseparable. One day they were gone. And we knew that they had eloped and they had gone away. That was the story that went around. When she came back with Aidan after 2 weeks, they said they'd been to Ashford Castle down in County Galway and had gotten married there in a back room, which they had for weddings. And no, she wasn't pregnant. She was just madly in love with this man. So she invited everybody on the island to a party. And they rented, the father, he rented the hall down in Achill Sound. And everybody came and there was a band and they played and she danced and her father danced and he danced with her. And her mother danced. And everybody was there except Mad Mike Murphy. The door opened. There was a crash. It was funny because there was lightning outside. It was a really hot evening. So maybe it was the heat, but there was lightning, lit up the sky outside. You could see the sea far off. And there he stood in the doorway, Mad Mike. Now, the parents hadn't put out an invite. It had just been open. Everybody knew that there was going to be a dance. There was going to be a celebration for Aidan and Rachel. And as it's like on islands, people could come. So it was nothing unusual, except there was something unusual about the way he looked at her, Mad Mike. There was a strange fire in his eyes. And he looked suddenly taller than usual. He was dressed all in black. And then he came into the room, and after him came, I don't know how to describe it. They looked like corpses. They came 2 by 2, silent, dressed in rags, dressed in clothes that were falling off them. And there was a strange smell in the room. If you've ever walked behind a hearse where the windows were open, you know that smell of sweet putrefaction, of death, of decay. These people came 2 by 2, whatever they were, people or not, and they stood around the walls of the room. And the people in the room moved towards the center. And he, Mad Mike, stood in the doorway. His eyes were gleaming red. Now we saw it. And then those corpses, whatever they were, they came over to where she was dancing with Aidan and they ripped Aidan from her arms. They carried him over to where Mike stood, 6 feet tall. He looked taller in the doorway, and laid him on the floor. Before he could do anything, get up and get away from him, Mad Mike brought out a knife from his pocket, a silver-handled knife, and in one terrible second, he had ripped the throat of Aidan from ear to ear. Rachel Rachel ran over to him and threw herself on Aidan and lay there and screamed and looked up at Mad Mike and said, "Kill me too, you've killed my love, you've killed him." But Mad Mike, silent, didn't say a word. He picked her up. He reached down amidst all that blood that was streaming from her lover and picked her up. And without a backward glance, he walked through the open door and out into the lightning and the thunder that was thundering outside. And all those strange creatures walked 2 by 2. They filed out of the door, and only the smell of decay stayed behind. Of course, everybody looked for her everywhere. They looked all around. They scoured the place, the island, for days. Finally, they buried Aidan in one of the cemeteries in Duach, and they burned the hall down. They closed it, and they put a light to it and burned it down. And for months, we heard nothing. Nobody knew what had happened to her. Her parents stayed on the island, always a hope that somehow they would find her again. It was a year to the day that there was a knock on their door one evening, parents' house. And the father went to the door and opened it, and there she stood, tired, exhausted, grey looking, her clothes in tattered. She couldn't say a word. She couldn't, because her tongue had been cut out. Exhausted, her face, her eyes grey. And as she looked at her father, and he looked in horror at her and asked, "What is it, my dear? What is it?" She pulled a knife from the pocket of her tattered skirt, and it was a silver knife that Mad Murphy had held, and it was covered in blood. And he knew then it was Mad Mike Murphy's blood. That night, she lay in bed. She died in her sleep that night, but her face, there was a satisfied look on her face as she died that night. And that's my story.
Jane.
I made that up this afternoon.
That was a wonderful, haunting tale. I felt so much in that story as we all did. I was somewhat aghast, shaking my head. I thank you for that. Those are all of our tellers for tonight. We're here until 8 o'clock. If anyone would like to tell a story, you are welcome to it. I have a standby story that I'd like to share with you. Those of you that know me, you've heard this several times, but we have time, and my glasses are bothering me, so I can't really see, but I see better telling the story. There was this girl. She had a green backpack, and a friend of her family's, Mrs. Martinez, had just recently died. And so she had gone to the mortuary, Lopez's mortuary, to pay her respects. And when she walked in, there was a girl sitting at the table polishing her nails. The girl with the green bag, she asked where she could pay her respects to Mrs. Martinez. The girl, painting her nails, she never looked up. She told the girl with the green bag, "When you get to the end of the hall, take a right. You get to the end of the other hall, take a left, and it's the first door on the right." The girl with the green bag, she went to the end of the hall, she took a right and then a left, but she couldn't remember if she was to go into the room on the right or the room on the left. And she went to the room on the left. And when she walked up to the coffin, she realized she had gone into the wrong room, for this was not the body of Mrs. Martinez, but it was that of a very young girl. And as she looked at that girl, She noticed she wore a beautiful white dress. She thought it was a very expensive dress. And as she was admiring it, she looked closer and she could see something sticking up from behind the girl's neck. And she reached down. It was the price tag. It was a very expensive dress. And at that moment, Mr. Lopez came in and he turned to the girl with the green bag and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we'll have to close her coffin now. You're more than welcome to come back this evening and pay your respects. The services are at 7." And at that moment, he heard someone stricken with grief wailing down the hall. And he turned to the girl's green bag and he said, "Oh, please excuse me." The girl with the green bag, she looked down and he had left a metal file that he had used to screw the coffin. She picked it up. She was a very smart girl, and she quickly began to unscrew the screws in the casket. And she opened the lid and she removed that white dress and she stuck it into her bag and she took off running down the hall, left and right and left, running, passing the girl, still polishing her nails. She never stopped running. Not even when she got home, because she quickly ran up the stairs to her room and closed the door. And she removed that white dress from her green bag and she hung it so all the wrinkles could come out. And later that night, she slipped into that white dress and she crept out of the house and she ran to the school gymnasium where they were having a dance. The girl with the green bag, when she walked in, her friends told her how beautiful she looked in that white dress. They invited her out into the dance floor to dance, and they were dancing and having a good time, and the music was loud and the rhythm was going, and all of a sudden her arm got very stiff. She had danced so long, she turned to her friends and she excused herself. She went over to the refreshment table where she poured herself a glass of punch. She drank it and felt refreshed. She returned to the dance floor, dancing and singing and having a good time. And the girl with the green bag, she felt a chill down the back of her neck. She again excused herself and she went into the girls' restroom and she kept toying with something and she removed that dress and there it was. You remember it. It was the tag. She brought the tag to her mouth and she bit it. She slipped back into the dress and returned to the dance floor. And in the middle of their laughter and singing and the lights, the girl with the green bag, she fell to the floor. Her friends, they gathered around her and the music stopped. She heard someone say, "Someone call an ambulance." The girl with the green bag, she felt when they lifted her body and put her into the ambulance. And there in the hospital, she could hear the monitor monitoring her heart going up and down, up and down. And then she heard nothing. The girl with the green bag, she saw the doctor stand over her and he took his hands and he placed it over her face and he closed her eyes. The girl with the green bag, she heard the screws being screwed into her coffin. The girl with the green bag, she felt the bumpiness of the road as they took her body to the cemetery. And there at her gravesite, the girl with the green bag, she could hear the mourners wailing with grief. And then she heard nothing. She felt her body being lowered into the ground. And then she could hear the grave diggers throwing dirt upon her coffin. And then they began to speak. Did you hear about that girl? What girl? The girl at Lopez Mortuary. They say she set up out of her coffin. She was wearing a slip. They say her family, they were enemies with the Gutierrezes. It was said they took zombie dust and sprinkled on that white dress. I wonder whatever happened to that white dress. That's the end of my story. So I thank you for listening, and we still have a few minutes. And I would like to say that story was told to me maybe 20 years ago by Richard Young, who is a great and fantastic storyteller, I think from Arkansas, if someone could correct me. So I tell that tonight in honor of him. And I will open it up if there is anyone there who would like to tell a story. And now I need my glasses.
I'll tell one.
Okay. And oh, Mary Ann Blue is going
Put that
to
right on.
Okay, well,
Yeah, this is just a little quick something. That's fine. You can find this on, I bet you can find it online. It's something that is, it's by James Whitcomb Riley. And he lived in the 1800s. And so this story is a couple of 100 years old. It's a poem. I learned it as a child. My mother loved it. She had learned it as a child. And it's called The Goblins Will Get You If You Don't Watch Out. No, I think it's called Little Orphan Annie, actually, now that I think about it. Little Orphan Annie has come to our house to stay, to wash the cups and saucers up and brush the crumbs away and shoo the chickens off the porch and dust the hearth and sweep and make the fire and bake the bread and earn a board and keep. But sometimes in the evening, when the supper things are done, we sits around the kitchen fire and we have the mostest fun of listening to the witch tales that Annie tells about. And the goblins will get you if you don't watch out. Once there was a little boy who never said his prayers. And when he went to sleep at night, way upstairs, his daddy heard him holler and his mammy heard him call. And when they turned the covers down, he wasn't there at all. And they seeked him in the chimney flue and cubbyhole and press. They seeked him up that chimney flue and everywhere's a guess. But all they ever found was just his pants and roundabout. And the goblins will get you if you don't watch out. Once there was a little girl. She'd always laugh and grin and make fun of everybody, all her blood and kin. And one night after supper, when the old folks was there, she mocked them and she shocked them. And she said she didn't care. And just as she turned her heels and turned to run about, there was two great big black things standing by her side. And they snatched her through the chimney before she knowed what she's about. And the goblins will get you if you don't watch out. And little Orphan Annie says, when the blaze is blue and the lamp wick sputters and the wind goes, whoo, and you hear the crickets quit, and the moon is gray, and the lightning bugs and dew is all squinched away, you better mind your parents and your loved ones near and dear, and cherish them that loves you, and dry the orphan's tear, and help the poor and needy who clusters all about. Or the goblins will get you if you don't watch out.
Thank you, Mary Ann. Appreciate that. I remember part of that. The goblins will get you if you don't
Yeah,
watch.
and I
it.
hadn't practiced that. Didn't think I was going to do it or anything. So, one thing I will say to everybody is that when memory fails you, just do it. Just keep on going, because there were a few flaws in that, and some of you who know that poem probably heard them, because I'm almost 73 and memory doesn't always serve me. So there you go. But yeah, that's a good one. And that's a good one to use with any age group of children that you're telling to. They all love it. I've told it to every age group. And you can jazz it up or tone it down depending on the age.
Thank you, Mary Ann. I want to thank everybody for telling their stories tonight. Before I even thank the tellers, I want to thank our audience, because a story is not a story unless we have ears. So everyone who is listening tonight, we thank you for coming with the San Antonio Storytellers Association. I'd like to thank Susan for her story, Jane, Nathan, and Mary Ann for the poem. We have a few minutes left if someone would like to share. Before we do that, I want to make sure I tell you on October 30th, the San Antonio Storytellers Association, we're telling stories at Confluence Park, celebrating our 30 years of storytelling. And would appreciate it if everybody could come out and hear stories that night. We don't have a set time. We're looking at maybe 6:30ish, so we can start and have a little light and then soon tell some spooky stories. Again, I want to thank John and Karen for our technical support and placing us on YouTube. And now I'll just leave it. If anybody would like to say anything, it's 7:52 and we still have a few minutes left.
I believe Chester is a storyteller who probably has something he could share with us. A little quick one.
Chester?
Well, yeah, it's hard to shut up a storyteller, but if I can get it in a few minutes, I really hadn't thought about this story in a long time. If you have time, I'll take a crack at it. In fact, this came about a few years ago. We were having our festival, and one of the people putting it together said, we'd like for you to do a ghost story. And I said, I don't do ghost stories. She said, oh, I just tell a story, throw a ghost in there, and you got it. And but then I got to thinking, I did have one that kind of is on the fringe of it. So if you'll bear with me on this, it's about my grandmother. My grandmother was a very, very special person, strong lady. My grandfather died when I was like the 4th grade, and she lived the next 40 years on the farm by herself. Tough lady, tough old bird. But she had an aunt that lived in California. Her name was Aunt Sadie. And ever so often, she would go out to California to see Aunt Sadie. She'd take the bus, and once she even flew, which was really, courageous of her. And you got to remember, my grandmother didn't have much, and she was one of those people that always looked forward and never looked back. I just really admired her a lot. But anyway, she was the executor of Aunt Sadie's estate, which wasn't very much. And she got a notice one day that Aunt Sadie had passed away. So she hopped the next bus and went to California, and she took care of settling Aunt Sadie's affairs. But there was one provision in her will that she didn't know what to do with, because, see, Aunt Sadie selected to be cremated. And that did not set well with my grandmother. And it got even worse when she saw the instructions were she was supposed to take this urn of the ashes and go down to this amusement park, I think it was called Knott's Berry Farm, and take a little boat out into the water there off the Pacific and dump the ashes. Well, that was just one step too far for my grandmother. So she left the urn with her name at the funeral home. She refused to go out on that boat and do that. She just couldn't handle it. As tough as she was, she couldn't do that. It's not that she couldn't handle it, she just didn't want to handle it. So she comes back to Oklahoma, out in the western part of the state, back to the farm. And one day she gets a call from the local funeral director. Said, Cora, there's a package here for you from California, and I think it's an urn with ashes. What do you want me to do with it? My grandmother goes in and gets it and takes it home. Sets it there in her house and looks at it for a long time, wasn't sure what to do, but she finally figured it out. She went out to her car shed where she parked her old car. She got a shovel, put it in the car, and at midnight she drives to the cemetery and she picks out a tombstone of another family member and buries Aunt Sadie's ashes. And goes back home. In the next few weeks, the rumors start to come. It seems that there has been some sort of figure appearing out at the cemetery. It's kind of an odd thing. It kind of looks a little bit like a lady, and then Grandma kind of fesses up what she has done, and we got to figuring out what the deal is that Aunt Sadie is buried out there in this urn by the tombstone of another family member. But sometimes on one of those dark and quiet nights, she comes to the surface because all she sees around her there is red dirt, red Oklahoma dirt. And she's supposed to be seeing blue Pacific water. Something is wrong. And so she comes to the surface looking. And occasionally the story is that someone else says, I think I may have seen Aunt Sadie. And I have photographed the cemetery. I have lots of family there. In fact, I'm going to be buried in that cemetery. And I have no idea where that urn was placed. And that's the story of my grandmother and Aunt Sadie.
Thank you, Chester, for that story. Really did appreciate it. We have 2 minutes left. If everybody wants to chat, once again, I'd like to thank everybody who was here tonight, our great tellers, our great listeners. I'd also like to thank you, Jane, for the wonderful job you do our PR for us. It has never failed. Each month, I always listen to Texas Public Radio, and just in the car, I will hear about us, and I thank you for that. Anybody else like to say anything, or we can just chat for these last two minutes that we have? Again,
a question, if I could.
Yes, sure.
I'm just trying, and I may steal your ideas because it looks like this is quite a deal. Periodically, you just do this storytelling event like on a monthly basis, and you just kind of have a round robin telling, and that's what you do?
Usually, well, prior to the pandemic, we would meet at Brook Holler Library, and once a month, yes, we would meet. And I'm sorry. We would meet once a month, and muted. Was I not? Could you not hear me?
No, go ahead. You're good.
Okay. Yes. So it is. Yes, it's like a round robin. We would sign up every night, and for this night too, we welcome people to tell.
Well, it looks like a great way to get people an opportunity that otherwise might not have too many opportunities. And
Yes.
it's pretty. And thank you. I really appreciate the invitation, a chance to sit in tonight. Thank you.
Yes, you're more than welcome. You know, it's a very safe environment for people who are practicing their stories and who want to share. You know.
Chester, it's a great way of getting new members because you're in the public and people come by and it doesn't cost anything. They can sit there and listen to stories.
Yes.
Chester, I would like, no, I'm not. I would like to encourage you to spend some more time in that cemetery and find where that's buried, because you know, that might that might be something you need to know.
Not at night.
You
not
might
at
see her. You might see her. Golly.
I eventually will wind up there, so maybe I can look.
Yeah, but it'd be good to do it on this side of the veil if you could. Just
Actually,
you
there's
could-
more than one ending to that story. I chose this one because I like this one a lot better. The funeral director says I really kind of made up part of that, but up
That's
until the
good.
burial, everything was true.
Oh,
Well, that story resonated with me at a very personal level because I made very clear to my younger brother a few weeks ago that when I go, I want to be cremated and I want my ashes to be spread on the ocean. And I want to travel the whole world for eternity. Maybe I better change my will. I don't know. That story kind of scares me.
I knew of a woman who was very, very mad at her ex-husband, and she said when she died, and she was the one who had the money, she wanted her ashes mixed with paint and put on the ceiling of his bedroom. He would ever get married again, she'd be right there watching. And
you're still telling chilling stories.
that one, yeah. Honest to God.
I'm trying to see everybody who was there.
I think we had about 14 people.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was looking to see.
Yeah, Daniel was here. Daniel Blake. He's an old VIL, very important listener.
I can Emcee, and then I have to stop to look. Oh, yes.
See, he's on
Yes,
fire.
Daniel. Oh. I hope everyone is able to come out to Confluence Park. I will be a teller. Jane is going to tell. Sue, Gloria. I can't think of Gloria's last name.
Tunapelli.
Tunapilli.
Yes,
Tunapelli.
she's going to
An
be.
author is coming. Forgotten his name.
Yes, Xavier. Is it Garza? Xavier Garza.
Something like that. Yeah, he's good.
Xavier Garza.
Mhm.
Marianne, we're chatting now. Marianne, I was hoping you were going to tell skin. That's my favorite tale. I ask you for that every time.
Well, maybe another time, my
I
dear.
wanted that. When you said you were going to tell, I was getting ready to say that, and you said, "Oh, a poem," and I said, "Okay, anything you tell is good," but that's just my favorite.
Yeah, come to
Kentucky.
Marianne. We haven't heard you in too long.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Please.
Well, it's 8:03. I guess we can tell each other, everybody, good night. I want to thank everybody again for great stories.
Jane, are you still in Ireland?
No, I got back about 3 weeks ago.
Mm.
But as you can see, the influence is still there.
And rightly so. I love that story tonight.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think that's
great.
Thanks, Nathan.